Hello, everyone. Welcome to Film Frauds, where myself, Matt, and my co-host Tyler
Hello.
provide our completely unprofessional, 100% biased opinions on the movies of today, tomorrow, and yesteryear. But today we are continuing to search for modern classics. Last time we did Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, the first movie to ever achieve Film Frauds modern classic standards. And then today we are investigating Birdman by Inarritu. What's his first name?
Alejandro, I think
Alejandro
Inarritu, yeah.
Inarritu.
How did we end up here? This place is horrible. Smells like balls. We had it all. You were a movie star, remember?
But Tyler, what is the Modern Classics series?
So the modern classics, so we grew up in an era of filmmaking that is just kind of more interesting than I'd say other eras. And one thing we're kind of really, I'd say, fascinated with is what movies are going to age well. What movies over the next 30, 40 years are we going to look back on and think, man, that was definitely like a classic. And it's an impossible thing to actually know because only the passage of time will kind of reveal these answers to us. But we think it's kind of fun to go through some movies that came out, probably like 21st century, probably not like early 2000s, but like 2000 and like five and on, probably
Yes,
about movies that were just like, these things are gonna maybe age better, maybe they have more cultural relevance, maybe they're just more important than other movies that have come out, and we're just curious to see what is going to be the ones that like stand the test of time 30 to 40 years from now.
of course. And of course, Birdman came out in 2014. It
Did
was Best Picture Oscar winner,
it did
Best Director
it
winner
did
as well.
Yep.
So the movie's 9 years old at this point, so we can kind of get an idea of it's been some time. It's been a decent amount of time. 10 years is a long period of time in film history. And so, Tyler, what is your history with Birdman?
It's kind of, I wonder if you have a similar history to me, because then this movie came out, I mean, we're starting, I mean, 2014, we were in high school at that point.
Yes.
So we were like starting to get into movies as like many people that age do. I think my first experience or exposure to this movie was like weirdly, probably I saw like a Jeremy Johns, Chris Stuckman review of
A
this on
crossover?
YouTube. Like not a crossover, that would have been
Oh,
cool at the time. I would have lost my mind at the time if they crossed over. But definitely like seeing, I went back and actually rewatched Chris Stuckman's review of this movie, and I was like, I remember all of this. He gives like an A+. He's like, it's one of the best movies he's seen. And that's definitely where I was like, what is this? And I was also really into the Oscars at the time. And in 2014, my ride or die was Boyhood until the end.
took
And I
12 years to
remember
make.
took 12 years to make. Did you know it took 12 years to make? And I remember watching it being like, this movie, Boyhood, has to win. Like, it has to win. And then Birdman won. I was like, what the fuck is Birdman? And then I got it on Blu-ray on a like what's it called, a Black Friday sale, and I watched it and I was like, whoa, holy shit, this is like an absolutely fascinating movie. I think it was like my first exposure to like one takes or like simulated one takes. It was the one of the first movies I was like, there's a style here that I am not used to. There is something here deeper that I am not used to. It's definitely one of the first like, and quote, like artiste, like auteur movies I think I've probably ever seen. And I was like, wow, there's definitely something different. But at the time, I was like, man, Boyhood lost. I was ready to throw a fucking riot. I was ready to boycott the Oscars. I was like, how does Boyhood lose to this piece of shit at the time? And then I watched it and was like, oh, that makes sense. This is a much better movie than Boyhood. So, Matt, what about you?
I saw this movie in theaters.
You did?
Yes.
Were you?
Um,
Oh, because you were definitely, you could see it in theaters. You were over, you were 17, I think, at that point.
yes. I
Okay.
went with my cousin John. My mom dropped us off at
Oh my God.
the theater, and the lady who got our ticket was Russian, and she went, "How old are you boys?" And we're like 17, like showing our IDs, our junior permits.
Yep. The little paper thing, and you're just like, let's
Yeah.
go.
So yeah, I saw it in theaters and I loved it when I saw it. And then because it was on HBO in like the mid 2000s quite often, so I watched it then a few times, but I
Mhm.
don't think I'd seen this movie for a good at least 5 or 6 years. And actually, when we made our best movies of the 2010s
Yeah.
podcast episode, I didn't rewatch it, but I just remembered loving it so much. I think I put it on my top 5 of the
Okay.
decade. And so when I saw the movie for the first time, I thought it was great. And upon rewatches, I really enjoyed it. And then upon this rewatch, I know we gave Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, like it passed our criteria
Yeah,
for modern classic. I don't, that movie doesn't smell my top 10 of the decade. And
interesting.
it might be my top 10, my top 20, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. This movie is Birdman is has a case of being the best movie of the decade of the
Wow.
2010s for
Okay.
me. Rewatching it now, I think it's a movie that the more you watch it, especially as you get older, it's going to change for you and evolve
Mhm.
over time. I think this is probably one of like the greatest scripts in a movie I've ever experienced. The
Okay.
directing style, as you said, is probably my first introduction to like long take shots. I remember when I saw it for the first time in theaters, like I didn't know you could do that with a
Yeah.
camera, that you could just keep
Yeah.
going. And I think because there are so many characters with different backgrounds, each one is struggling with personal issues and also with like career and artistic issues, that it tackles a ton of themes, but never really feels jumbled because it's like a reflection on real life, and that it's a jumbled mess and there's a ton of different people, different backgrounds. And I think the way each character arc is tackled, in which none of it is really like 100% fulfilling, but you get enough of each character and each struggle, that the movie, for something that's 2 hours long, just flies by.
Yeah.
And I think like the choice to make it give it the appearance of like one elongated shot just works so well with like the realism that this movie is going for. And of course I say realism, but in fact this movie gets very fantastical at times as well.
Yeah.
So what did stand out to you like on this most recent viewing?
So I'm in similar boat with you. I think this is my second, maybe third time seeing this. I didn't see it until home. And then I was with you. I think I just went like 5, 6 years without ever seeing it again. I think I watched it once in the meantime. When watching it again, my memory of it was a little bit clearer than I could recall. So I'm assuming I had seen it. But I'm in a similar boat to you. Inarritu is a director, and we'll talk about probably what we've seen of him. And he doesn't always hit, I think, the more like spiritual, ethereal, like more surrealist elements of his movies, as well as maybe the movies tried to be. But there is no denying that this is like a very like special movie. His movies look like nothing else. His movies have ideas that I just naturally kind of think are interesting. If
Mm.
you look at like or listen to any interviews that he gives, he's incredibly obsessed with like the human experience. That is very evident here. But this is me, and our other friend Mark will talk about like novels and books, and how like the best books are formed by like rage and frustration. And this feels like a movie formed by rage and frustration at film culture, frustration at critics, at art, at the struggle of art as art, or art as like a capitalistic venture. Um, I'm in a similar boat. I think
Art
this movie,
as a narcissistic pursuit.
yeah, art for the sole self, for the sole focus of fueling the inner ego,
Yes.
entirely. And this movie's phenomenal. I just want to before we even talk about anything or even sound like I'm downing it too much. This movie's absolutely like astounding. It's got like it's got some of the more interesting like camera movements, camera takes, like the technical aspect of it and the sheer spectacle of it alone on like another viewing were probably the most impressive things to me. Just
Yes.
like watching how the fuck they managed to make this and put this together. This movie was shot in 19 days. And they had to shoot it they had like a 5-day span each week, where because like the theaters were booked out, they shot it on location. Like movies don't feel and kind of look like this a lot of the time. I pulled a double feature when I watched this. I watched this in the 1998 movie Ronin with Robert De Niro, and you're just watching these movies and you're like, these things are shot on location in like actual practical sets, not on green screens, not on this kind of stuff. And it's invariably makes it a more interesting, like magnetic watch than most other movies. And you're right. I mean, what's his name? Inarritu makes long movies. He makes movies that are not very like they're challenging watches, not because of the content, but because of usually like how much stuff is in it. And this is no exception, but the movie flies by. I was shocked when I hit pause and I was like, oh, I have 9 minutes left. I was like, wow. I
Mm.
was like, okay, I'm just gonna like muscle through this. This is great. I really dug this. I really like this. I'm curious to kind of see if this, like, talking about it, if we kind of deem this to be a modern classic. I think I know probably your opinion already, but curious to see as we kind of dissect it more. Yeah. What's your thoughts on Inarritu? He's an interesting director.
So I think I've only seen The Revenant
Okay.
of his other movies. And I rewatched The Revenant this past week for this. And if I could only grade Inarritu as a director, it'd be 10 out of 10, 11 out of 10. He's phenomenal. Everything that's great about Birdman from a directing standpoint is also in, well, most of the things I should say that are great about Inarritu from a directing standpoint are also in The Revenant, especially the opening long take battle sequence in The Revenant is phenomenal and under discussed, I think, in like epic, memorable shots in cinema. But there's a screenwriter in Birdman that is only a producer in The Revenant, and I think that person may have been the one who added all like the humanity and layers to the characters in Birdman, because other than Tom Hardy's character in The Revenant, everyone else is really boring and one-dimensional and has absolutely nothing of importance to say or do.
Yeah.
And there are just side plots that have no meaning, that are like with the Native American and her tribe's leader and the daughter, that are just there to add length of runtime. Whereas like Birdman, like every scene has some sort of importance to it, whether it be like a drama or like a funny scene, sometimes both. Everything that feels necessary and immediate. Whereas in The Revenant, you're like, okay, here's the side plot of the daughter with the French fur tradesman. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
And I mean, The Revenant is great. Was all shot with natural lighting, and there are some, again, amazing shots in the movie. But it almost felt like, with the dream sequences and Birdman being really great, and also necessary, I think, because you're in the psyche of Brigand. The dream sequences in The Revenant are slowing me down. I think it should have been gritty throughout, and I think the movie should have had Tom Hardy as the lead, because he is way more interesting. And I'm almost, in my headcanon, I think Tom Hardy added depth to his character, because he's the only one who has depth in the whole movie. Like with him being scalped when he was on an earlier job, he's like, I don't have a life. My life is to live, and I can't live without making money. And you understand him so well. Whereas DiCaprio is like, I love my son, and I go on weird dream sequences sometimes, and I can't believe they killed me. I can't believe they left me for dead, even though I was literally dying. And so it was completely necessary, completely logical conclusion that I would probably die here. It is Revenant. I don't want to trash, because I think there's, again, amazing elements to it, but I don't know. Watching Birdman, it's just, it does everything the Revenant does, but just on a much better level. So I have only seen Inarritu movies I've seen. I know the movie Beautiful is supposedly great with Javier Bardem, and he made a 2022 movie as well that I did not watch. Did you watch it?
Okay, so I'm in a similar boat. I watched Birdman, Revenant. The movie that came out in 2022 called Bardo. I watched. You ever just watch a movie and you like watch it and you're like, this is too much for me. Like, I don't have the emotional capacity. I watched 11 minutes of Bardo and just went, nah, not right now. Because in the first 5 minutes of the movie, a woman gives birth. Then the doctor says he wants to go back inside. He says the world is too fucked up. And then they take the baby and they put it back into the woman. And then she walks out of the hospital with like the cord, the umbilical cord, like dragging on the ground. And I went, I don't think I really want to watch this at like 11:30 a.m. on like a Thursday. Like, I think I'm just like, I'm good for now. He's made a couple other movies. Olive has seen Babel. She really likes Babel. That was also, from my understanding, 2006 was an Oscar contender. But I'm in a similar boat. I rewatched Revenant for this. We saw that in theaters together.
Yeah.
We saw that in theaters together, and I had not seen it again since theaters. And I was on a fucking bender because I thought I bought it on Blu-ray. I was like 99% convinced I owned it, and I cannot find it. This is not like my thing where I text you guys, was like, what happened to my Eraserhead criterion? I was like convinced. I've held this Blu-ray in my hands, I'm pretty sure, in my house, even probably while naked too. Who knows? But I've definitely held it, and I could not find it. So I watched it on Amazon. And it's, when we've been talking about modern classics, I was watching it kind of from that lens. I was like, what happened to this movie? And you watch it again, and it's incredibly obvious why it was important, or people watched it at the time, and also incredibly obvious why it has seemingly, at least in like the film culture aspect of it, has been nearly forgotten. Because at the time it was like, this is the movie Leo's going to win a Best Actor for. We're like, sure. He was crawling around in mud and in a horse and
He had
grunting.
an organ.
Yeah, a log liver, and he was a vegan. And it's like one of those things you're like, yeah, he's really fucking good, but he's better in Wolf of Wall Street. I watched that recently, and there's a more
Better than
like
Once Upon a Time in Hollywood.
better in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's not the best performance from him in the 2010s. I don't like
And
the
he's being
movie.
completely acted under the rug by Tom Hardy in the movie
Yeah,
too, which makes it even
exactly.
worse.
And I think that's what happened with the movie is like the discourse turned to is he not, he's probably not even the best actor in this movie to eventually just like, oh yeah, The Revenant. Like, sure, it's a weird movie. It's like a narratively like defunct, like emotionally kind of void movie.
Yes.
He just like it's the
It's
whole
like what an artsy movie would be to someone who doesn't watch artsy movies, where it's
yeah,
like scene of me holding my kid, and there's no
yeah, and it's
dialogue, and it's like a
yeah,
big landscape in the background.
yeah,
It's really obvious. And
yeah. It's a
whereas in
beautiful
the
movie.
Birdman, there's just insane shots that blend, that are surreal but are also blended with reality. And
Yeah,
it's completely lacking. Like I think the Revenant would have been so much better. It was just gritty throughout,
yeah.
focusing maybe just on Tom Hardy and Leonardo DiCaprio's characters specifically. Cut 30 minutes out of the movie because it's way too long.
Yeah,
Um,
that was definitely a thing. It's like I remember reading a review about The Revenant and being like, "There's like 100-minute great genre thriller like in The Revenant somewhere," and you're like, "Yeah, absolutely." The Revenant isn't one of one in terms of how the movie looks. It's
yeah,
absolutely astounding. We'll never have like an individual take about The Revenant. One because there's not a lot to talk about.
no,
And two, like I don't think I'm ever gonna watch like that movie anytime soon again. Like I've seen it. That's all I need. But you're watching The Revenant and you're like, what is Inarito doing with these like spiritual kind of scenes? Because a lot of the spiritual scenes, the purpose of it seems to, instead of develop a character, it seems to rather remind the audience of the motivation, because the motivation occurs and it's like the rest of the movie is like a fight for survival. And then it becomes the story of vengeance. But in the meantime, it's this like weirdly structured, the kind of ineffective narrative movie, but it's like it's an event. It's something that to behold, it's to look at. There's clear style and work done to it. And I mean, that was what, an 11-month shoot, I'm pretty sure. They were out in the woods doing everything. And
yeah.
I was watching it with Olive and we were trying to figure out, they're like, how did they film these sequences? Like, what were they doing?
It was just seen like at night with all like the when they're searching for glass and they have
Yeah.
their torches out.
Yeah, yeah.
It's one of the greatest shots I've ever seen in a
Yeah.
movie, and I'm like, I have no idea how you did this in natural lighting.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
amazing. Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing with like Leonardo DiCaprio in the water. Like there's like shot when he goes down the waterfall, you're like, that's a dummy. Or what Olive was like, yeah, when they cut to like first person, that's on a boat. But then you're watching it, you're like, is that Leonardo DiCaprio like going down the river? Like it's
Yeah.
like it's very interesting. And Inarritu is just like a fascinating director. I mean, if you the first 11 minutes of Bardo, you're watching, you're like, fuck, this movie looks better than anything I've seen in a long time. His cinematographer, Emmanuel Lubezki, is a very renowned cinematographer, has done really, really
Did he
great
win the
movies.
Oscar for Birdman?
I am not sure. I didn't look that one up. Maybe, but I mean, Birdman is also really kind of like in retrospection in terms of like public reception. It lost very famously to Eddie Redmayne, Theory of Everything. I watched an hour of the Theory of Everything and went, this movie's boring. And you're like, yeah, he's cool. He's being Stephen Hawking. He's given a good performance, but it's just like it's the Oscars bias and like we're gonna give the Oscar to a guy portraying a guy kind of thing instead
Yeah.
of like a more transformative like meta experience. Yeah, this movie, like Inarritu is a fascinating director. He's clearly one of the better visual filmmakers. We can talk narratively. Birdman might be the exception compared to like The Revenant, but yeah, weird time for him. He won back-to-back Best Directors, 2014, 2015, which is crazy. So yeah, great
Yeah.
stuff.
But I would say, speaking of Michael Keaton, I think we want to talk about
Yeah,
Birdman.
yeah,
He is the heart and soul of this movie.
yeah.
I mean, he should have won the Oscar for it. Not that,
Should've won the Oscar.
I mean, I think people nowadays remember his performance more than Eddie Redmayne's performance.
Yeah.
Um,
Have you seen that movie? Have you seen Theory of Everything?
no,
It's
I haven't
boring.
seen it.
It's a
Yeah.
boring movie. Yeah.
And he was the perfect choice for the role because he has a history with Batman. Birdman's obviously like a take on Batman. The Brigham character is a take on Michael Keaton in real life. He was in the 90s a superstar who was in Beetlejuice, Batman Returns.
Yeah.
And then 2010s come by. He's not really in anything.
Inarritu adamantly is on record saying it's more coincidental and a perfect fit. And he's like, Birdman character is more about me, but it is a perfect coincidental Michael Keaton Batman Birdman. I mean, it's hard to argue. He's like very adamant. He's like, no, it's about me and the circumstances with that. It's a great fit. But yeah, he's like, it's not about Michael Keaton. It's not a meta about him. So yeah.
And his character is he was this superstar actor from
Yeah.
the Birdman movies, and he made 3 Birdman movies.
Yeah.
And he's been tempted to make a Birdman 4 to revive his career, but he wants to make this play called What I'm Talking About When I'm Talking About Love in order to change his public perception and become more known as an artist.
Yeah.
So he's writing, directing, and starring in this play. Then he has basically no experience working in Hollywood because he's a great actor. He can get away with this kind of stuff. He has the budget to get away with this stuff. And there are just so many close-ups on his old face.
Yeah.
It's like the movie is visually so beautiful, but it also doesn't hesitate to show like the ugliness or like the cracks, if you will, of people. And the character is suffering from he's a narcissist. He has crippling self-doubt. He is trying to change his image. And I think Michael Keaton and he's also maybe has superpowers, but it's also he's probably insane. The more likely scenario, more likely. And he's dealing with horrible family issues as well. His daughter, played by Emma Stone, was a alcoholic who was a
drug addict.
Yeah. And his wife, they had a falling out. They're not divorced, but they've had a falling out and they were separated.
Yeah, he's not a good person. The little revelations about who he was before the moment we see is he's violently abusive. There's that scene where she's like, you threw a knife at me.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay. Or she's like, why did we break up? And he's like, remember that time you're fucking like Janet, blah, 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 whatever her name is in the bed. Like he's a serial, like he's violent and probably like a serial cheater, like horrifically narcissistic, like you said. A wonderful, like glaring look at like a celebrity-dom kind of thing and like what celebrity culture does this like aspect of like the internalization of like you're God, like you're above these people kind of thing is like that really, really fascinating look at what mass celebritydom does to an individual and the psyche.
Yeah. Especially when you have the option to sell out, like one phone call away, you can do it.
Which doesn't this make it so interesting? We're reviewing this in 2023. We're reviewing this in a post The Flash world.
Yes.
Where Michael Keaton did come back. You haven't seen that movie, right?
No.
I went to the theaters and watched it because I have no self-respect for myself. It's I saw Blue Beetle too. I'm a lunatic. It's like every criticism made of like say like superheroes and like going back to it. It's weirdly like ironic that Michael Keaton then immediately went back playing.
Not immediately. He was in like the Founder movie, the McDonald's movie. He was an Oscar nom for, I believe.
He did, yeah.
But
he's in Spotlight. Spotlight's a great movie. That was the one Best Picture. It was back-to-back Best Picture winners for Michael Keaton. Michael Keaton was at the top of the world, but then he eventually went back to it. And it's so interesting to look at like a movie that criticizes that type of thing with a star that is seemingly meta aware of his reception in Hollywood and his role as a superhero character. And then he went back to it 9 years after the creation of this movie in a movie that is a historic box office bomb. Nobody like gave a shit about that movie and is like embarrassingly not good. And it's really, really utterly fascinating. But yeah, I had to get that point off. I've been sitting like thinking about that.
No, it's really relevant. And also, was Michael Keaton when this movie came out, Birdman? 50s?
I can look it up real quick. Yeah, I can see how old he was.
But like my point is like he's running all over the place and a lot of like one shot takes. It's not as physically demanding as Leonardo DiCaprio eating a liver, but he's running around New York City.
He was early 60s. He's 71 now, so you have to imagine like 9 years ago. Yeah, he's early 60s. Yeah.
Yes. So it's a very physically demanding movie for him too. And I think as someone who worked in stage crew like in high school, I think it captures the chaos of being like both like in rehearsals and also when like during actual like live shows, like the chaos of being behind the curtain or up in the catwalk and things like where you're dealing with like egos, not as much with high school, but like people with issues, I should say.
Eccentric personalities.
Eccentric personalities, yes. And just things going wrong, props falling tons of random things, stagehands not knowing where it's supposed to be, and like it just nails that behind the curtain environment so well for me.
Yeah.
So that stuff was like, it was nostalgic in a way watching that, because I think it so perfectly captured it. And also the rehearsals as well, like going through the same script over and over again. So that you basically, even like if someone who worked as a stagehand knew the script pretty well by the end of it, that stuff is captured so well. And the characters in that environment are captured as well too. Like Edward Norton, I think he's probably, I mean, I think Emma Stone's probably the second best performance in the movie, but Edward Norton, I think second or third.
See, I got some
think?
interesting. Well, one, I think it's absolutely, because you do have more experience with like actual theater production. I don't. I went to one stage crew meeting. I had to remove nails for 30 minutes and went, fuck this, I'm going home. Like, no way, I'm not doing this. It's pretty interesting because Edward Norton, this isn't like an alleged, we will say alleged, just, you know, to avoid probably like anything, but he's known as like a difficult person behind the scenes. And there's this really great moment in the GQ breakdown where Inarritu is going over his movies, and Edward Norton, his character, I mean, the movie is like essentially like a satirization of like eccentric backstage like theater personalities. Everybody's heightened up a little bit more to, you know, to accentuate the oddities of the people who in the eccentric personalities. But there's a great moment in the interview where Edward Norton's renowned as being like a difficult person. And then that scene where he's introduced, where he's like moving around and he's like dictating Michael Keaton on like, you know, you have 4 lines to say the same thing. I don't know who he is. I don't know, like saying, and then Inarritu was like directing it, and Edward Norton was like giving him pointers. Like they did like a bunch of takes and he's like, you should do this, you should do that, you should do that. And it's just like it perfectly blends that you're like, yeah, Edward Norton is like probably like a narcissistic, like egocentric, like he wants control, and his character fits that perfectly. We were talking about like the best performances. For me, it's like, I think Edward Norton, like I was watching it, I'm like, this dude is fucking so good in movies. He's so good. And to me, honestly, like him and Zach Galifianakis.
Yeah, Zach Galifianakis
are
is
like
phenomenal.
Weirdly the standout to me, like rewatching it. Michael Keaton is like it's almost like obvious to say like he's the reason the movie succeeds. But every time Edward Norton was on screen, whether it's like him and Michael Keaton fighting, like he steals the scene every time he's in it. He's one of my favorite actors. I wish he did like more stuff and like better stuff.
Yeah, I think the brilliance of like the script too is like,
you
can make fun of him for his like his narcissistic personality, is like his like he needs to be like a tyrant, but also like you can't deny his love for theater too.
Yeah,
like the points that he makes on Michael Keaton's script, like he's thinking about the actual lines more than Brigham is. Brigham just wants to say the lines.
Yeah,
he wants it to be well, but he's not really thinking about like the larger context. Whereas, you know, Edward Norton's character is actually thinking about the larger context of what's going on.
Yeah,
and he has the whole play memorized. And again, there's a tragedy to his character too, because like he only feels alive when he's on the stage.
Yeah,
which leads to a funny scene during like the end of the play, not the end of the movie, but in the play, where he's with Naomi Watts, and then that's when Regan comes out with a gun, and Michael Keaton is so good because like when he notices what's going on, he goes but he gets back into character.
Yeah, he like, you see him glance down, he's like, oh, like whoa. Yeah, he's Edward Norton he's impotent. He's not able to get up for 6 months. He's in a relationship with Naomi Watts' character. And then he's like,
I mean, that's fiction in itself, Naomi Watts.
Matt, you're like, wouldn't be me. Yeah. Edward Norton, no way. And then he gets it. He gets like fully hard on a stage, like, and it's just like you see it, and like the audience laughs. All the preview nights are like disasters. It's so great. We could like break down like individual scenes. What are some of your favorite scenes in the movie? Like what really stood out to you on a rewatch?
So I don't really remember the specific context. I think it's after one of Michael Keaton's one of Brigham's like narcissistic episodes where he's alone. And he has the telepathy control, and like and he walks out, and it's like this like barren hallway, but the camera goes into like this misty going out stage, and becomes like shrouded in smoke, and then his girlfriend is acting. That was one of my favorite scenes, because again, it's like the blend of like surrealism and realism. I thought that was great. The scene where Brigham gets locked out and is running through New York City, which I watched the same YouTube video you did, so like I know that like Inarritu hired a band to play in the middle of Times Square because they couldn't afford to lock it down for some.
He didn't hire the band. That was it was a random band.
And it was a random band.
Yeah,
okay, but
They had
The ban
30
was because he
extras.
was afraid people are going to be like looking in the camera. So those
Yeah.
aren't. I mean, there's some extras, but a lot of them are people who are actually on Times
Yeah.
Square just walking around.
Yeah.
And so he's afraid people are going to be like looking in the camera and making stupid faces and stuff.
Yeah.
But you've been to Times Square, right?
Sucks. It's just the worst place on earth. I'm gonna throw
Yeah,
that out
but like
there.
I'm just saying, like the how like the lights hit the ground, everything feels so realistic about
Yeah.
like it feels like you're walking through Times Square.
Yeah.
And then again, going back to Brigham's, like going back to like Michael Keaton's like the physicality performance. You know,
Yeah.
he's the one who's walking his underwear in the
Yeah.
middle in the middle of Times Square.
Yeah.
Keep maintaining character. All that stuff is great. The scene with speaking of things that are like more relevant today than 10 years ago. The scene with the play critic in the bar
Yeah.
where he's reading one of her reviews and he goes labels, labels, labels. All
Yeah.
you do is label things, and I'm like, I'm not I just watched this video recently, so I'm not solely pointing out this person, but he's a famous film critic on YouTube, YMS. He did a video where he was talking about the movies he saw at a recent film festival, and if you watch the review, it's like this was boring, this made me
Yeah.
tired, this was dumb, this was stupid, this was blank, and
Yeah.
there are some, this was good, this is great, he said as well, but again, it's like it is like the labels of like simple sentences of just like this was this. And no real discussion of like technique or any sort of in-depth discussion. I know he does in-depth discussions on his channel, but like for the video that I watch and some of his other videos as well, it's a lot of like this was blank, simple, and he's doing it for his audience, I would assume so as well. But again, it's just as relevant 10 years ago as it is now. Maybe even more, because I feel like YMS has a bigger following than this film critic than this play critic in this movie.
Yeah. I mean,
but
this
that
movie
was
is
another
like
great scene.
this movie's ahead of the game. I mean, even talking about that, like even just using that channel as like an example. I mean, this movie's 2014. It's like before, like it's in the superhero boom, but before the big explosion. Like the big, like we have to have 5 of these movies, 8 of these movies every year. But I mean, like it's pretty on the nose with like Inarritu's clearly very angry and frustrated with a lot of the comings and goings of art, of contemporary art, of film criticism and art criticism. And he's just like laying it all bare. I mean, he's like, you risk nothing. He's like, this is like, I'm risking everything on this.
Yes.
And the critic is just like, yeah, he's like, she's like, I'm going to write you a bad review. Like, I'm going to kill your play. He's like, you haven't seen it. She's like, I hate everything you represent. She's like, I'm going to ruin you. And
it's worth because, like, again, with the complexities of every character, she's right in that this is a narcissistic project for Brigham, and that he only has this because he's a millionaire actor.
Yes.
But at the same time, he is putting his insecurities on the line. He is taking a risk, and it's unfair of her to just bash his play just because of what he stands for. So, like, again, with Edward Norton's character, they bash certain types of people, but they never take away like their humanity or why they're doing what they're doing. Absolutely, and I think that's another again why isn't this in The Revenant?
It's like every because have you read the even just like going have you read the Revenant book?
No,
I read it. It's like the narrative thrust in the Revenant book is like literally like he's left for dead and the Tom Hardy's character takes his gun, and that's the entire motivation, and that's it. So they at least try to add something in The Revenant, but it's like still like it's a visual movie over like a more narrative, like hyper-focused thematic movie than Birdman. And Birdman, like we still like the superhero aspect of it. He doesn't really
multiverses now in superhero movies, like that, like one of the last scenes where like the drummers are banging on their drums while Bumblebee fights Spider-Man. Like that's more relevant now than it was. Because I can more conceivably see Transformers Marvel crossover now than I could see 10 years ago.
Did you know
right?
I was called so I talked with our friend Mark, and he was telling me about, I'm gonna spoil the ending of Transformers Rise of the Beast real quick, because that actually is pretty relevant. Just heads up, spoilers. He said that the end of the movie is a tie-in to it's a post-credit scene that shows that Transformers and G.I. Joe are in the same universe. And I know they're both owned by Hasbro, but they're like the same, like they're going to be in universes going forward. Like it's kind of a similar thing. So that thing is there, this cross-property focus on rather like characters and like look at who the people are rather than the actual like movies itself. But like this is one of those things of like we could talk about this endlessly, but like what do people expect? Like Inarritu is clearly like trying to be an auteur filmmaker you asked the same thing with like the Scorsese comments that blew up a couple years ago, where he's like, these movies are roller coasters, or Tarantino, who came out maybe like last year, and he's like, I don't like, who are these people? Like, I don't care for the, like, but what do like you expect out of these type of movies? Do you expect people who try to make like art for art's sake to be impressed, or like fans of these massive capitalistic ventures of like blockbuster filmmaking? Like, nobody is. And he's clearly like extremely frustrated with how things are going in this movie. It's utterly like it's similar to like the Michael Keaton character. He's like, he's bearing his soul, he's putting all his insecurities on the line, and he's just like, here it is, it's on us for a platter, and we have to digest it and kind of like,
and reflexively, it's criticizing like the artistic environment, because like they're gatekeepers. Like they don't want people to get in. Like they're kind of like self-sabotaging themselves too when you think about it. Because they're pushing Michael Keaton into selling out again.
Yeah,
you know,
there's also, I mean, like there's the thing of like, it's like Zach Galifianakis' character. He's like tickets are like, they're around the block to see you, which is interesting because it invariably brings more people into theater. Like you're like, oh, Birdman, Regan Thompson is doing theater. Like I'm more likely to go see that because he's the guy from my child. I mean, you see it multiple times in the movie where like someone will come up, like an older person will come up and be like, "You're Birdman." Like
that great scene where Edward Norton and Michael and Regan are in the bar, and then Edward Norton's like, "No one knows who you are," and as he says that, like a family comes up, they're like, "Oh, you're bringing, like, can we get your picture?" And then Edward Norton's take the picture. So
is that the same sequence when he's like, "Why'd you become? Why are you doing this?" And he shows the Raymond Carver, and Edward Norton's like, "This isn't a cocktail napkin. He was fucking drunk, man." Is it the same sequence? Yeah. Edward Norton's character, I loved Edward Norton in this movie. I know, I just like, I was watching it, every scene he was in, when he's being like, when he gets pulled out of the tanning bed, because he just like, he lied on the newspaper. And he's like working with like, Regan Thompson is like working with like a monkey or whatever. And he gets pulled out, and he's like, you gave him whatever. And Michael Keaton's like, my dad used to like beat me, and he's like weeping, and Michael Keaton's like, fuck you, and then they fight. It's just so it's so funny. Like this movie,
because he was acting, because like
he was acting.
They think they're having an actual moment, and he goes, well, none of it actually happened.
He's like, see, I can act too, bitch. And you're like, damn, this is great. I really like this movie. The more I think about it, the more it's just like they don't make them like they do like this. Like they just aren't movies like this that have come out recently.
No.
Which makes,
I mean, even like in like the Oscar nominated movies now, I don't think they're anywhere near as daring as they were in like as Birdman, like Nomadland or like Coda. Like, what are these movies?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And the fact that like this movie this is where I think it's really interesting, where we can talk about like the search for modern classics, because we could talk endlessly about the filmmaking aspect of it. And we'll go back and talk about more scenes and like elements of it that we love. I mean, how Inarritu blends the passing of time in with his cuts, or with like the movement of the camera. But like the Oscar is basically giving Best Picture to a movie that is essentially looking back at the very system they perpetuate, and kind of giving them like the middle finger, and then being like hooray kind of thing, like go you. It's like, it's similar to like how Parasite is basically just giving the middle finger to like the upper class, which is every single person in that audience. It's a really interesting kind of moment of this. My curiosity is rather, I was looking up some just like looking up best movies of the decades. I was looking up like the Rolling Stones list. I was looking up a couple other lists. Nobody has Birdman on it. The Rolling Stones gave the best 50 movies of the 2000s, of the 2010s. No, the 2000s up to 2019.
Okay.
Or sorry, 2010s. Yes, sorry. And they had 50 movies, and Birdman was not on the list. They gave 50 movies. It's really interesting how this movie has kind of become seemingly more relevant, yet less people have talked about it. And it seems like it has fallen out of like cultural film culture, if that makes sense, despite it becoming a more relevant type of movie.
I think it's you're right in the sense that like Inarritu made a movie in 2022, and I didn't know he made a movie until I was looking up what recent Inarritu movies came out for this podcast. I'm like, oh, Bardo, like, what is this movie?
Yeah.
You know, like The Revenant got huge publicity when it was being advertised to. Like the trailer was like millions and millions of views.
Yeah.
It probably did pretty well box office wise. Like director of Birdman a couple of years before, or was it even like a year before?
Birdman was 2014. Revenant was 2015. Yes.
Yeah, so you can tell his Inarritu star is kind of faded, even though his movie is now more relevant now than it even was 9 years ago.
So Birdman, not Birdman, Revenant had a budget of 135 million. It grossed 533 million in the box office. That's a big movie. That's a big deal. Yeah. It's a big movie. I think there was like some stuff behind the scenes of The Revenant. I don't want to like say too much because I'm not 100% certain where maybe the behavior wasn't the best. I don't think it was anything like horrifically bad, but I don't think it was like the best.
Inarritu's?
Yeah, I don't think it was like the best, which could explain. But you're right. Like the only reason I knew that an Inarritu movie was coming out was because I live next to a smaller like art theater. And I remember walking by one day and seeing the sign going like Bardo. I was like, what the fuck is Bardo? And I looked it up. I was like, Inarritu made a movie? And then like all of a sudden, like a little posters in LA came out. And it was a Netflix movie. And Netflix gave him like a fuck ton of money to make a movie that I had to type in the full BARD before anything of it popped up on Netflix. It's utterly fascinating. What else stood out to you about this movie? What else, like on a rewatch, did you really like?
I just love the scene where between Brigham and Sam Stone's character, where she's putting the like where she's like we're in her AA program, they had to like map out. They have the toilet paper lines, and they're just drawing a line for every like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
No, every 100 years of like known history.
1,000 years. Yeah.
And then like the entirety of human history, it has like one roll of toilet paper, and then and then Brigham wipes his mouth with it and discards it. Like that's
the wonderful the egoism and narcissism on play there, where he literally takes all of humanity and wipes.
I took it more as like just like how like insignificant like the human race is, like more of like a cosmic sort of way, but I can see it that way as well. And then Zach Galifianakis like lying about like people who are gonna like I heard that Martin Scorsese is gonna be there.
Yeah,
like,
I heard he's casting for his new movie, and then people come out and they're like, "Is he okay?" And he's like, "Is it true about Scorsese?" He's like,
"Yeah, and the Pope's gonna be there too."
Yeah, he's like, "I'm the only one keeping this together." It's like bangs the wall.
It's really too bad that he's just he's only in crap. Zach Galifianakis, like,
he's a good actor.
He's a great actor, but he's just in a bunch of crap. And then like when his phone goes off, like during one of the showings, and like things like that. He's so funny in it. I mean, like every scene has some sort of relevance to it, but those are the scenes that I've already mentioned. They're the ones that stick out to me the most. I would say
there is a lot.
And also like the artsy fartsy scene, where he's like walking around drunk, and the guys were setting Macbeth. And he goes into the bar where it has like all like the lights around him, and like that's even meta in a way too, because then the inner monologue comes on and he goes like, "Oh, done with that artsy fartsy crap. Now it's gonna do some explosions." And then he goes into full egomaniac Birdman mode. Like that whole sequence was.
Well, there's the whole like the Macbeth like yell where it's like signifying like nothing.
Yeah,
like,
told by an idiot. Struts and frets on the stage, told by an idiot, signifying nothing.
That was great. I remember like listening to that, like when he's like yelling it, I'm like, is that Macbeth? And it was like, I was like, wow. I was patting myself on the back, threw myself a party, like I know Macbeth. It's weird because it's like a lot of Inarritu is clearly like a very deliberate filmmaker. His frustrations with things are not subtle. This is not a very subtle movie. I mean, there are like,
it's subtle and it's like individual characters, but like
it's messages.
Not subtle, and it's a lot of its imagery and it's like overall theme.
Yeah, when Regan Thompson is like just like, or when the critic is like lamenting about, or they're like lamenting about superhero movies, it's just like you're like, this is like this speech taken from probably like Inarritu's exact thoughts. You're like, there's a lot of different stuff like that. I mean, if
you want to talk about the quote?
So there's a thing I was looking up because I was going through some like research and stuff like that. And I saw like Inarritu referred to, I more saw like an RDJ, Robert Downey Jr., who is directly mentioned in this movie and
Yes.
he's like, oh, he's in that fucking Tin Man. The people who are called out in this movie are Woody Harrelson, he's doing the Hunger Games sequel, Michael Fassbender, who's doing a prequel to
Yeah,
the
the
X-Men
X-Men.
prequel,
Yeah.
and then Jeremy Renner, who's an Avenger, and they're like, oh, they put him in a fucking cape too. And then they have Robert Downey Jr., who they literally go, this the Tin Man, like you were him, you established the ground before it. Like they directly call it out. And I remember seeing a Robert Downey Jr. responds to Inarritu calling superhero films cultural genocide. And I was like, holy shit. So I found this Deadline article. It's a couple paragraphs. I was a teacher, so bear with me. I can read this fluidly. Um, so the Deadline article basically starts by asking, like, how does this lampooning of Hollywood's fixation with superheroes affect your chance of ever getting a crack at one? Inarritu goes on the record to say, I would be terrible. I think there's nothing wrong with being fixated on superheroes when you're 7 years old, but I think there's a disease in not growing up. The corporation and hedge funds have a hold on Hollywood, and they all want to make money on anything that signifies cinema. When you put 100 million and you get 800 million or a billion, it is very hard to convince people. You tell them you'll put in 20 million and you'll get 80 million. Now that is a fucking amazing business. But they say 80 million, I want 800 million. Basically, the room to exhibit good, nice films is over. These are taking the place of those things. Deadline says, is there anything you enjoy about these superhero films? Inarritu says, I sometimes enjoy them because they are basic and simple and go well with popcorn. The problem is that sometimes they purport to be profound, based on some Greek mythological kind of thing, and they are honestly very right-wing. I always see them as killing people because they do not believe in what you believe, or they are not being who you want them to be. I hate that, and I don't respond to these characters. They have been poisoned, this cultural genocide, because the audience is so overexposed to plot and explosions and shit that doesn't mean nothing but the deadline of being human. And then there's like another thing, and then he goes on to say, that's what I'm saying, superheroes. Just the word hero bothers me. What the fuck does that mean? It's a false, misleading conception, the superhero. Then, the way they apply violence to it, it's absolutely right-wing. If you observe the mentality of those films, it's really about the people who are rich, who have power, who will do the good, and will kill the bad. Philosophically, I don't like them. Inarritu's clearly obsessed with humanity. He's like, superhero movies say and mean absolutely nothing. Like, they don't do anything.
That's interesting because he said that around phase one of Marvel, where Marvel phase one at least had like the social commentary being very anti-militarization.
Yeah, like imperialistic kind of thing.
Yes. Yeah. Now it's just like you watch genocide of an entire alien race and you're supposed to feel nothing but like triumph. You know, exactly. So like, it's even worse now. I wonder what he'd think of The Boys.
I mean, the whole, like, this is the thing though, is like, it's kind of like what I was saying. Like, what do you expect? Like, it's like one of the things of like, you're asking someone who clearly hates the type of culture of film. And like, here's the thing, like, for people who like our generation grew up on these superhero movies, we can't escape them. They're a staple of what our early film going experience was. They're theater experiences, they're event experiences for us. I like them. I can understand exactly where he's coming from. They're a lot. They don't really do a lot to push a needle. I saw Blue Beetle recently. It's like, it's incredibly derivative. It adds like, I was walking with Olive and I was like, she's like, are you really going to see Blue Beetle tonight? I'm like, yes, I'm going to tell you exactly what happens. The movie's going to open. It's going to be the villain. It's going to be the Blue Beetle. You're going to see the character. And it's like plot beat for plot beat. I was able to know exactly what happened. But the big thing is, the theater was fucking packed and people loved it. They were laughing. People were like clapping and cheer. These movies represent what contemporary film culture is. And the audience goes to these movies. I think
it also, because I think Inarritu watches movies for the sake of like getting something profound out of it.
Yeah.
Whereas, I mean, his job is to make movies.
Yeah.
Whereas like the guy who's working 40 to 50 hours a week just wants to see a movie just to have a good time. So like I understand what he's saying about cultural genocide, but I also think it's being very like melodramatic to a certain extent. Because I mean, they are, I mean, definitely there was a Disney takeover, which seems to be kind of going down now.
Yeah,
we say like the movies aren't showered in praise as much as they were 10 years ago. But and it's the same thing. Like I think Park Chan-wook said the same thing, where it's like, you know, if you want a peaceful experience, take a bath. But if you watch one of my movies, I'm gonna force you to get something out of it.
Yeah.
which is relevant right now because Old Boy just hit 20 years. And speaking of modern classics, the fact that this movie hit 20 years, and then like my YouTube feed, I don't know if yours is too, but like he queued to the video with him, breaking down
Yeah.
the Old Boy fight scene.
Yeah.
Letterboxd has been doing videos with him, so like Old Boy is a modern classic right now.
Yeah.
And Park Chan-wook is a filmmaker who makes movies specifically to have an experience.
Yeah.
What kind of
Yeah.
experience it is depends on the
Yeah, it
person.
depends if you're really into like
But he's not into
violent
space
sex.
lasers going up into the sky and slaughtering thousands of aliens
Yeah.
with no moral.
There's an interesting thing. I mean, I looked it up this morning, but 18 to like 30, the average amount of movies someone sees per year in a theater is like, it was like 3.2. People go to movies not as much at like we are not like, we're not like obsessive film people. We love movies, are a part of our lives. They're a staple of who we are, but even we aren't like the mass like, but we see movie. I see a movie like every fucking week, and that's not the norm. So people are going to go see the big events, the ones that people are talking. That's why a movie like Barbie and Oppenheimer blowing up is like a massive deal. These type of movies that are like actually like creative ventures is an interesting thing to see succeed, and to like really have people go to it and think about it. Yeah, I went to
Young
Oppenheimer.
filmmakers like Robert Eggers and Yorgos Lanthimos getting decent attention around their movies when they come out.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, and I think the reason like we can like think about, is Birdman a modern classic? Probably.
I'm wholehearted, like this is the most modern classic movie I think I can think of.
So I want to ask you, what when we are trying to define modern classics, what do you, when you think of a modern classic, what do you think of is a modern classic? Like, how are we defining it? Because I have my thoughts.
So it kind of a lot of it depends on whether I like the movie or not, I will admit.
Yeah.
To me, it either has to be like there's something like really unique that nothing like for example, like no movie can replicate what Mad Max Fury Road did. But I would consider it a modern classic because no other filmmaker could replicate what it's been able to do. Like it has no impact on the action movie genre since it came out because no one can do it.
Yeah.
But I would consider it to be a modern classic because it's so exceptional.
Yeah.
Here, I would consider Birdman to be a modern classic because of both, for one, because I think the movie is just a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Like an undisputed masterpiece from both like a script and like a directing standpoint.
Yeah.
And also because it only becomes more relevant as the years have gone by. Like I think relevancy has to do, even if people aren't acknowledging it in current discourse. I think that it still is relevant whether people talk about it or not.
Yeah. I think our take, like you say Mad Max Fury Road is a modern classic. I would say, I mean, I can't argue against it, but like if we're thinking of like what has had a more impact, it's the John Wick movie. Or you've seen more attempt at like like the Nobody movie. You don't like the Nobody movie. I do. I'm a sucker for these type of movies, guys. I think at this point you probably know if you're listening to this. But like the Nobody movie is made because the John Wick movies are successful. If the John Wick movies aren't made, that movie isn't made. You see this with like kind of like longer take, like actually like choreographed action with like action stars that you're like, I didn't know you were an action star kind of thing. Like these type of movies, I for one, like regardless of whether or not Birdman has fallen out of film culture, regardless of whether or not it has, there are a lot of people who don't like Inarritu. He's not as probably polarizing as a lot of other filmmakers, but there are some like real adamants that people think he's like an idiot. But like, of course, every movie has detractors and lovers and stuff like that. It's probably a modern classic, and I think it's a modern classic not even just for its content, but for the fact that its thematic messaging is only aged more, and we don't see a negative trend. I mean, the absolute peak of superhero movies has probably been met. I don't know how you beat the highest grossing movie of all time. I mean, it's probably peaked in 2019 with Avengers Endgame. But it's absolutely, it comments on like the indicative nature of where film culture is going, not even just in superhero movies, but in like major blockbusters, major events. The fact that like a movie like Red Notice cost $200 million. I was in line for Blue Beetle, and there was I didn't see who it was, but there was, I'm assuming a couple on a date, and there was a girl, and the guy's like, what do you think is the worst movie you've seen a bunch? And she went, probably Red Notice, the movie with Ryan Reynolds and The Rock.
And The
she's
Rock.
She's like, it's awful, and I've seen it 3 times. And you're like, interesting. Okay. You're like, that's really fascinating. I don't know. I mean, do you want to vote? Is it a modern classic for you, and why? Tell me why.
It's modern classic for me because I think it is just like a feat in directing
Yeah.
with its like, the illusion of the long takes. And again, I mean, long takes are more popular now than they were in 2014. So you could argue that, or I could argue that long takes were in one part. I mean, a lot of it is more likely because of John Wick, but in my head, like maybe some of it had to do with Birdman as well. um, and also Kerry Fukunaga and True Detective season one too. And also just because of its scripts, as I said, like every character has pros and cons. They have areas where they're justified, areas where they're unjustified, and it's criticism of art from both sides. It's just a movie that like looks at things through every single angle imaginable, and even though it prefers certain angles, it doesn't. It manages to also be critical of itself as well. And just with its commentary specifically on blockbuster movies today, I think, as I said, is more relevant now than it was when it came out. So to me, it's a modern classic because to me, it's a modern classic, and also it's firmly like it might be top 5 movies of the decade for me.
Wow, that's bold.
Yes.
I would say if we're trying to define what exactly a classic is, and maybe looking down 30 years down the line about what film culture will be, what movie making will be, what type of movies are made, it's hard to argue against the movie that directly like indicates exactly where things are going. It represents an artist's frustration with how movies are made and what they are and what they represent. Combine that with the fact that it's a genuinely great movie. It's like it's hard to beat something like this. Probably definitely deserved to win Best Picture that year. Definitely Michael Keaton definitely deserved to beat Eddie Redmayne. I don't know if Edward Norton won. I probably should have looked that up. But Inarritu won Best Director. Probably makes sense. Yeah.
No, J.K. Simmons won Best Supporting Actor.
You won Best Supporting Actor? Oh yeah, I mean that's hard to beat. Like how the fuck do you beat that? I mean to me it's a modern classic. It's something that I hope years down the line we're still talking about. If any indication of the last 9 years, though, I kind of hope these movies don't fall out.
And this episode will be what reignites the spark.
Go watch Birdman. Let us know what you think. I looked up. I know Reddit isn't indicative of what exactly modern film culture is, but Reddit r/movies has 30 million users. That's a lot of people. I looked up when people were talking
and they're all Birdman. Recommending About Time.
They're all recommending About Time. About Time's a great movie. I looked up like Birdman. I just want to see what people were talking about. Not a lot of people were making posts about Birdman, being like, hey, Birdman's pretty great. I know it's more of like a movie news kind of thing, but there's some discussion. It's one of those things of like, yeah, it's probably a modern classic. And does that make it our second one? It is our second one.
Yes.
We're 2 for 3. I don't know if the next one will be, though. Matt, do you have any final opinions on Birdman? Any last thoughts you want to get out?
Watch Birdman. If you haven't seen it, if it's been a long time since you've seen it, give it a rewatch.
Give it a rewatch. Yeah, absolutely. Give it a rewatch. Let us know what you think. Matt, any final general thoughts about anything?
Do you want to tease what's going to be the next episode?
So Matt and I...
First form, bye.
Matt, you're like, I don't want you going to soliloquy. But shut the fuck up. Matt and I saw First Reformed in theaters in 2019 together. We both probably left going, shit, I don't know. Sure. Like, whatever. I guess that's something.
I don't remember if I was actually in the theater. I think I drifted away like like the 2 main characters.
You drifted away and just thought about climate change.
On a huge pile of pollution.
First Reformed is regarded as one of the best movies of the decade, 2019. People
one
love it.
Hidden gems of the decade.
Yeah, directed by Paul Schrader. We're going to be talking about that one next, and then we won't spoil the one after that, but if you want, watch First Reformed and join us on the next episode. Follow us on any place you can find a podcast. I'm pretty sure that means at least this point iTunes, so it should be on iTunes because I think we just got a new logo. Thank you to the guy who did that. I'll put his name in the description and stuff like that, so you can go find him and show him love. But yeah, Matt.
As long as it's consensual.
As long as it's yes, as long as you aren't Edward Norton trying to have sex with Naomi Watts on a stage. That is
yes.
So that is this was fun, Matt. For hundreds of people. We didn't even talk about all the Birdman stuff. There's so many more things we could talk about, but yeah. Matt, any other final thoughts, or is that it?
That's it.
That's
all I gotta say, Jack.
Okay. All right, guys. Well, thank you for listening. Let us know what you think on, I don't know where you can let us know what you think. Rate us 5 stars because we love it and we love you. Matt, probably not. You probably don't love people.
Rate us 5 stars. Plug us on your Instagram.
Yeah. Plug us anywhere.
Do all that.
Do all that. Okay. Thank you guys for listening or watching us on YouTube or anything, and we'll see you guys on the next episode. Goodbye.